to mindful moments. Nourish your mind on the go. This audio uses AI narration to present our original book analysis. And today we're going to do a deep dive into James Baldwin's The Fire next time.
Oh, such an amazing choice. And it's a book that really, I think, speaks as much to us today as it did back in 1963 when it was first published.
Yeah, it really does. And it's so interesting because, it's presented as two essays, but they're both framed as letters.
Right.
Which is a really unique approach, I think.
It is. And I think that's how he manages to weave the personal with these sort of big, massive social and political issues in a way that is so compelling.
Yeah, absolutely. And the first essay, My Dungeon Shook, Letter to My Nephew on the 100th Anniversary of the Emancipation, it really sets the tone. It's addressed to his 14-year-old nephew, James, and you immediately feel that, love and the urgency in his words.
Right. And it's so important to remember the historical context here. I mean, Baldwin is writing this on the centennial of the Emancipation Proclamation, this moment that is meant to be, the celebration of freedom.
Right.
And yet he uses it to confront the reality that, for Black Americans, freedom is still so elusive.
Yeah, and it's that, personal approach to such a huge societal problem.
Yeah.
He's sharing, his brother's struggles, the pain that his nephew's father endured.
Right.
And how deeply racism really impacted their lives,
And that's what I think makes it so powerful. Baldwin lays bare, the psychological toll of racism. He warns his nephew. He says, the white world will try to define you using this derogatory term, right?
Yeah.
But he says, don't you dare internalize that label.
You can only be destroyed by believing that you really are what the white world calls a nigger.
Right, exactly. And, it's such a powerful statement, I think, about, self-worth.
Self-worth, yeah.
And resilience in the face of, incredible pressure and oppression.
Yeah, and it's this idea of, defining yourself on your own terms.
Yeah.
Right, not letting, a prejudiced society tell you who you are.
Exactly.
But it's interesting because, even with all of the pain that he's describing,
right,
there's still this thread of hope that runs throughout the essay.
Right, I completely agree.
He draws strength from, the resilience and creativity of Black heritage.
Absolutely. He wants his nephew to know, and by extension, all Black youth, that they come from this long line of incredible people,
Yeah.
who overcame, unimaginable obstacles to build this nation.
And that leads us to one of the most striking lines in the essay, which is, the very time I thought I was lost, my dungeon shook and my chains fell off.
Oh, that's so powerful, right?
Isn't that powerful?
Well, it really is.
Such a powerful metaphor.
And I think it speaks to this idea of breaking free, right? From mental constraints, but also from social constraints.
Yeah.
And I think that image, that metaphor of America as a dungeon, it's really crucial to understanding, I think, Baldwin's perspective. Because he's basically saying that, true freedom for all citizens,
right,
it can only be achieved by dismantling the existing power structures that perpetuate this inequality.
Yeah, and so we have this, deeply personal letter, right?
Yeah.
But addressing these huge systemic issues, all within the context of this major historical anniversary. Yeah. It's no wonder that this essay just continues to resonate with people today.
Absolutely. And then the second essay, Down at the Cross, Letter from a Region in My Mind, it shifts focus, right?
Yeah.
It's really more about Baldwin's own personal journey and specifically his, complicated relationship with religion.
Yeah.
He talks about growing up in Harlem, surrounded by poverty and racial tensions, and describes his adolescence as this prolonged religious crisis.
Yeah. And what did that crisis, look like for him?
So initially he found solace in the church, right? Driven by fear and guilt, he even became a teenage preacher for a while. But eventually that fervor, it gives way to this real disillusionment.
What caused that shift?
Well, as he studies more, right, and he's observing the hypocrisy within the church.
Right.
He starts to really question its teachings. He sees firsthand how the church fails to live up to its own ideals, right, of love and equality, particularly when it comes to racial injustice.
Right. And so the church wasn't the answer for him. Where did he turn next in this search for meaning and belonging?
Well, that's when he encounters the Nation of Islam.
Okay.
which was, this movement advocating for Black empowerment, self-reliance.
Right.
And this was a big turning point for him. Although, he doesn't ultimately fully embrace their ideology either.
Right, but he was drawn to their message, right? Because it resonated so deeply with his own experience with racism.
Absolutely.
And they were like really asserting Black identity and even God's Blackness,
Yeah.
right? As this like counter narrative to white dominance. And after years of feeling oppressed, I mean, that must have been incredibly empowering to hear.
It was. And, that's what makes his relationship with the Nation of Islam so complex. I mean, on the one hand, he recognizes the historical trauma, the systemic injustices that fuel their message.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, he also understood that true freedom, it couldn't be achieved through just separation.
Right.
He felt that focusing solely on, Black nationalism would actually perpetuate that division
Right.
and prevent true integration, and equality.
So the Nation of Islam like offered this really powerful sense of identity and community, but ultimately it wasn't the answer that he was seeking.
Right. And if we look at, the bigger picture, I think Baldwin's striving for something bigger. He's trying to transcend those categories of race and nation altogether.
Yep.
He envisions a future where those divisions no longer have the power that they do today.
And that's pretty radical, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, it was then, and it's still challenging, even now.
Absolutely.
And I think that's one of the things that makes Baldwin's work so enduring.
I agree.
He forces us to, like, confront these uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our society and really strive for something better.
Yeah, I mean, his writing style is just so powerful, right? It's raw, it's honest, it's incredibly lyrical. He's not afraid to, express those difficult emotions.
Yeah.
And he manages to combine those personal experiences with, really insightful social commentary to create, a reading experience that is just captivating.
Yeah, you really feel like you're right there with him.
Exactly.
Experiencing, his joys and his pain and his anger and his hope. And that's what makes The Fire Next Time just such a powerful and unforgettable book.
Absolutely. And, it's so relevant even decades later, right?
Yeah.
His words just compel us to, examine our own beliefs.
Yeah.
And grapple with, the complexities of race and religion and identity in America.
It's true. I mean, both essays explore those themes.
Yeah.
But in, like, such different ways, right?
Yes.
What do you think, what stands out to you about how those themes play out in Down at the Cross?
In Down at the Cross, we really see how Baldwin's personal struggle with faith, right? It becomes this, metaphor for a larger societal crisis.
Right.
He questions, the church's complicity in upholding white supremacy, both historically and in his own present day.
He says, the transfiguring power of the Holy Ghost ended when the service ended and salvation stopped at the church door.
Right.
That's a pretty, stark critique, right?
It is.
Of how disconnected the church can be from the realities of life outside its walls.
Exactly. And he's pointing to that hypocrisy, right?
Yeah.
The gap between the teachings and the actions.
Yeah.
And then his encounter with the Nation of Islam, it adds another layer to this exploration of faith and identity. What was it about their message that really resonated with him, initially?
Well, they offered, this really powerful sense of belonging and purpose, right?
Absolutely.
And they emphasized Black pride and self-reliance, and that resonated so deeply with his experience of racism, of oppression.
Yes, and I think for someone who's just had, this crisis of faith within the Christian church, the Nation of Islam offered, this different kind of spiritual framework,
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier, ultimately, though, he rejects their separatist ideology. Why do you think that was?
Because as much as he recognized the historical trauma, the systemic injustice that fueled their message, he also understood that true freedom couldn't be achieved through just separation.
Right.
He believed that focusing on Black nationalism would ultimately just perpetuate that division and prevent true integration and equality.
It's a really nuanced perspective.
Yeah.
He acknowledges the pain and anger, but he's also looking beyond it.
Exactly.
Towards something more inclusive.
He's really urging us to move beyond those categories, of race and nation, to recognize, I think, our shared humanity. And it's challenging.
It is challenging.
But I think incredibly relevant, in our current social and political climate.
So, what does all of this mean for us today? Why should we care about The Fire Next Time in, coming 24?
Because the issues that Baldwin is raising.
Yeah.
they're still with us.
They're still with us.
Racism, inequality, the search for identity and belonging in a very fractured society. These are ongoing struggles.
It's almost as if he, had this uncanny ability to see into the future.
Right. I know. It's amazing.
And, anticipate the challenges that we would continue to face as a nation.
Absolutely.
And I think by understanding, that historical context that he provides,
yes,
we can better navigate the complexities of, our current social and political landscape.
Right. Reading The Fire Next Time today is like holding a mirror up to our society, right?
Yeah.
We see reflections of the same struggles, the same questions about race, about justice, about the meaning of freedom.
And he really challenges us to, ask ourselves some tough questions, right?
He does.
Are we living up to the ideals of equality and justice that we claim to uphold? Are we doing enough to dismantle the systems that perpetuate inequality?
It's a call to action, right?
It is.
It's an invitation to, examine our own biases.
Yeah.
And to engage in these meaningful dialogues. It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in creating, a more just and equitable future.
And one of the most powerful takeaways, I think, from the book is that idea of interconnectedness.
Yes.
That line from My Dungeon Shook, we cannot be free until they are free.
Oh, so good.
It really, it stuck with me.
Yeah.
It highlights the reality that, true freedom for one group is dependent on the freedom of all.
Exactly. Our destinies are intertwined.
It's a reminder that complacency isn't an option. The fight for justice is, this ongoing process. We all have a responsibility to participate.
Absolutely. And engaging with works like The Fire Next Time, I think, is a crucial part of that process.
Yeah.
It allows us to learn from the past, understand the present,
Yeah.
and to work towards, that better future.
So to wrap things up, I highly encourage you to read The Fire Next Time for yourself. It's a powerful, challenging book that I think will stay with you long after you finish it. You can find a link to purchase the book in the show notes. And of course, make sure you subscribe to Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go for more deep dives into, impactful books and ideas. Thanks for listening.